Hi, welcome to part 2, where we're going to talk about chapter 1 of the book Consilience, the Ionian Enchantment. I am again very interested in the fact that this book is very much relevant in the current conversation between Sam Harris and Dr. Jordan Peterson. Dr. Peterson is on Joe Rogan right now, and he just mentioned how that's pretty much what Sam Harris and Dr. Peterson are searching for, is somehow consilience, on the ideas of objective truth and the search for objective truth, and where these stories play a role, where religious stories play a role, spiritual stories play a role. And so this book, again, as I've kind of gotten into it, again, has just really shown itself to be relevant to our current time. So today I'm going to walk you through chapter 1 of the Ionian Enchantment. It's a very short chapter. I even said it to start with. It's small but mighty, and it describes how Thales of Miletus in Ionia in ancient Greece, how he kind of thought, and he had the belief in the unity of the sciences, and so thought that all things could be known through these objective lenses. Aristotle, a few hundred years later, considered him father and the founder of physical science. And for Aristotle, Mr. Who I would consider the father of reductionist thinking and breaking things down and giving things manageable parts so you know what to do. Aristotle, that's kind of in my opinion, one of his battles with Plato. But this Ionian enchantment is what happened to Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson was raised Baptist in the between the 1920s and the 1930s, 1940s. And so that land at that time, that space at that time was very fundamental. And so Dr. Wilson had a very anti-upbringing than what he was to encounter moving forward, learning his biology. He said he chose to doubt. He said science is religion liberated and writ large, and that's kind of one of his things. At one point he says in this book, and I think this is interesting though. At one point he said he said that he was neither atheist or agnostic. He was just not Baptist anymore. And so for somebody who grew up around those fundamentalist beliefs, and within those fundamentalist beliefs, I know the power and the true part of thinking in a fundamental nature. I know the draw to thinking in a fundamental nature. It's very easy to get into that, and so but there's also a part that it closes you off to what the world is, and that we know that there are problems with people acting that way, but Dr. Wilson chose to doubt and thought that science was essentially religion that was liberated of an overbearing force. Now, I don't know. I think it's very interesting. Two things. One, he never admitted to say that he was neither atheist or agnostic. I don't really think it matters, but I think that's interesting. And then I also think in a second we'll get to this idea that what Dr. Wilson is calling for, he himself says it's a metaphysical claim. So like I said in the introductory video, Dr. Wilson is starting to play out or work out these ideas of defining human nature, and we'll see again where that comes from in his thinking momentarily. But he said we will unify certain knowledge when we know who we are and why we are here. And that's the very interesting call of the questions that we ask, and a lot of a lot of our issues come from those two questions. A lot of the negative implications of our lives come from those two questions: who we are and why we are here. And so in Dr. Wilson's opinion, this Ionian enchantment coming to him really was a driving force in the work that he did for the rest of his life. So as he was getting into college, he learned Linnaeus, and for those of you who don't know, Carlos Linnaeus is the father of taxonomy, and really organized a system by which to organize names of animals in scientific terms. So you had to know Latin. You had to be able to read and understand Latin to get these right. You had to be able to make sure that all of the taxonomic definitions were clear when you were looking at a new species. Dr. Wilson learned Linnaeus because he was trying, at this point, this was his personal goal. This is what he was working towards. He wanted to classify all the ants in Alabama. That was his dream, is to classify all the ants in Alabama. It's very funny what a great man would have committed his life to, and to the end he got to what he ended up telling us about ants was far more significant than what ants were in Alabama. So I do think this point is big, because I think there's a lot of things that I see where, when you're talking about thinking in Darwinian terms, you've got to think in progressions, and you've kind of got to think in patterns rather than in cut and dry pieces of time and space, and looking at the tools, basing your time and your space based on the tools that you're given. Thinking in Darwinian terms is all about thinking in patterns. But I think this is very important, that he said Chinese wisdom tells us that the first step to wisdom is getting things by their right name. And so for Dr. Wilson to lay the groundwork for his work, and all of his thinking in this book, he said that learning Linnaeus or learning the system of organization is very important to his success. Second, once he got to Alabama and the University of Alabama in the 1940s, he discovered evolution, or he finally came into contact with evolution. The biology professor at Alabama was a recent Cornell grad and had a fair amount of good research on his own. And when Dr. Wilson told his professor kind of what he was thinking about doing, which was classifying all the ants of Alabama, his professor handed him the systematics on the origin of species, and it was really taking the Darwinian work on origin of species and adding a little bit more genetic element to it. And his professor really challenged him and said, "You'll be a biologist when you read this book." And I thought that was a great line, a great teacher mentor line, and Dr. Wilson set off to understand it. Essentially, what he came to, and this is part of that Ionian enchantment, is that the world is orderly and explained by natural laws, and not very many natural laws. And again, thinking in patterns, seeing things in patterns, rather than just the reduction element, in which he hasn't gotten into that just yet. He doesn't really get into reductionism until chapters 2 through 5, where he really hammers reductionist science and counts for the good in it, but really takes it to task for not being able to create the new synthesis, right? And that's kind of what this idea of the Ionian enchantment is. You have multiple truths, objective truths revealed in time that constantly strengthen the theory that you're working with, and whatever theory that is, and as you in terms of social behavior, as you live those out, if you think about that in terms of social behavior, a lot of things start to make sense. That's kind of related back to that video I did the other day about individual selection, kin selection, and reciprocal altruism, really laying a framework for understanding how and why people behave. Because if you can map that a little bit better, you can have a little bit more knowledge and order, and it kind of explain the behavior that they are experiencing. He goes through a couple of scientists who are Ionian to the core, and the one he mentions specifically is Einstein. The grand unification in physics is what he talked about. One of the things he quoted Einstein as saying, "It's a wonderful feeling to recognize the unity of a complex of phenomena that to direct observation appear to be quite separate things." Sorry to remove my face, but I needed to make sure I read that. That idea that we are looking for multiple things to come together, and again, I'm thinking in terms of education and in terms of academics and in terms of my classroom. What do I know about how to teach kids? What can I name if I'm trying to think about education in Darwinian sense? What can I name about what students need to know from my biology class? What can I know? What can I name? What can I define? The lessons that they need to learn to be disciplined and to be good students and productive thinkers and capable of themselves unifying things that they don't know so they can continue to adapt and evolve. Again, that's one of the things that this type of thinking leads to. But Dr. Wilson, says a lot of great thinkers have thought this way, and that's where Einstein comes in. Complex phenomena, coming together and appearing to be quite separate things, but coming together and having so much meaning tied to themselves. So Einstein was Ionian to the core. And he says Sagan was Ionian to the core. Sagan said, there's actually a video with Carl Sagan on YouTube, that the ancient Ionians were the first we know of to argue systematically that laws and forces of nature, rather than gods, are responsible for the order and even the existence of the world. And so these ideas are really important to science in scientific thinking. But kind of what Dr. Wilson is saying and what Dr. Wilson is calling for is this idea of with your scientific thinking, or with his scientific thinking, he's more about the new synthesis and taking the ideas of what we know and merging them together in looking at things in patterns. It seems to me that this is very similar to what Dr. Peterson is saying when he's talking about thinking in Darwinian terms, thinking in Darwinian with Darwinian presuppositions rather than Newtonian ones, because the Newtonian ones, as we'll see throughout these next few chapters, tend to break things down, which is a very useful tool. It's why we know so much what we know. It's why Einstein, Einstein with the grand unification of physics, he was referring at that point to a successful alignment of the microscopic physics of capillaries with the macroscopic universe-wide physics of gravity. So taking the smallest piece of physics and uniting it to the biggest, and with that increasing the understanding of physics and then of chemistry and how those things continuously play together. So all of those things led to this Ionian enchantment that Dr. Wilson had. So for me, what I take away from this is, that maybe in a lot of ways I have this Ionian enchantment too, but it's specific to education. It's specific to helping teachers instill meaning in the way that they teach and the way that they learn, mainly myself, and learning to do that. learning to make things meaningful and learning to make things that my students encounter connect to the other things that they know. There is something, there is some form of activity or knowledge or learning or skill building that a kid or a student would enjoy. And if we allow those things, or if we push those things in front of kids, if we put those thoughts or artistic measures or artistic moments or athletics. That's why athletics is so meaningful right now, is because, again, as Dr. Wilson says, they find something where they can climb the steps in an organization from the smallest to the best, from the smallest part, from the earliest moment as a new sixth grader in middle school or a new freshman, or those moments where you start to being as successful of a student as you possibly can be. You need to think in Darwinian terms, in my opinion, to lay the framework out for kids like that. Because if you reduce things to such a small degree, you overcrowd the learner, you overcrowd the thinker with too much to do in very too little time. And I think that's one of our problems. I think we're trying to do way too much in academics and with way too little time. Anyway, those are my thoughts about Chapter 1. Chapter 2, we're going to talk about the great branches of learning, and Dr. Wilson is going to start laying his framework to how to connect those great branches of learning, so that human beings, so that we can have a better understanding of human nature that is grounded in multiple theories and in multiple ways of thinking. I urge you all, as y'all are interacting, as y'all are thinking with the videos we're watching or the studies that you're doing, to seek consilience in how you think. That way you can unify. That way you can unify all of the knowledge that you have and have a better understanding. So then your consciousness can make a lot of processes unconscious, so you can focus on the here and now, which is a big part of education. Okay? Hope you all have a great, what's today, Monday? Hope you all have a great Monday, and hopefully talk to you soon. Thank you.